We're going to be commencing our study today on page 38. We're right in the middle of the third chapter, entitled More About Alcoholism. Before we begin, however, let's make sure that we're all on the same page together. Remember that we discovered as we were studying the third chapter that this chapter is actually broken down into two distinct parts. The first part of the chapter deals almost exclusively with the first step, describing the alcoholic, allowing and helping the new person to identify themselves, to identify the disease, to identify themselves with their attempts to stop and to kind of pull the pieces together for them. And it also contains the only definition in the big book of a first step, saying that we learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholic, that this is the first step in recovery, and that the delusion that we are like other people or presently may be has to be smashed. And we discussed that at some length because there's an obvious, what appears to be an obvious omission there that so many people think belongs in the first step, that being that our lives have become unmanageable, that this is a clear indicator of our being an alcoholic. And I believe we have discussed in some detail the fact that that's not so, that the unmanageability of life is common to most human beings and is not the test of alcoholism. Some have asked me, but somewhere along the line the big book has to deal with this question of an unmanageable life. Somewhere in the steps we have to deal with that, and of course that's true. The question then is, where is it? Where does this question of unmanageability really come forward, where we need to deal with it, since we cannot do anything about it in our first step? The answer is that this is a function of the third step. Now I'd like to show you today, so that we can put to rest for once and all this question of unmanageability. We will see that we do in fact address this problem in great depth, and that the third step turns out to be at least the beginning of the answer. Please turn to page 62 just for a moment. The question of unmanageability means unmanageable by me, unmanageable by any of us. In other words, through the application of my own will, through the application of my own intelligence, industry, whatever it is it takes, that I can manage my own life. Obviously, what we're really talking about here, in view of the fact that we all live in God's world, and when we say the Lord's Prayer, we say, "Thy will be done," we're not giving Him permission. We're stating a fact of life that we must learn to deal with and live with, that God's will is going to be done whether we like it or not. But most of our lives we have struggled to conduct our lives in accordance with our will. And let's see where that has led us, and then we'll see what the answer is. On page 62, the first full paragraph, about 6 lines down from the top. Selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity, we step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. Sometimes they hurt us seemingly without provocation, but we invariably find that sometime in the past we've made decisions based on self, which later placed us in a position to be hurt. That last sentence illustrates precisely what the problem has been. That in our efforts to control and manage our own lives, we have constantly been making decisions based on self. and that these decisions based on self are those things which have led directly to our failures and to our injuries going on. So our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves. And the alcoholic's an extreme example of self-will run riot. Notice the word self-will. Self-will indicates clearly that what we have been trying to do was run our lives to suit ourselves, and that we have finally had to admit that we weren't able to do that our lives were unmanageable by us. Self-will run riot, though he usually doesn't think so. Above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. We must, or it kills us, and God makes that possible. That sounds like a very, very, very strong statement, that this selfishness and self-centeredness, if we don't get free of it, it'll kill us. Why? How does that compute? It's very simple. Go back to basics. We and each of us are alcoholics, which means that we are afflicted with an incurable, fatal, progressive illness. We cannot stop drinking on our own, and if we do not stop drinking, we will die. We have no power over alcohol, and therefore we have found that the only way that we're going to be able to gain the necessary power is by full and complete surrender to a higher power. We are blocked from God by our defects of character and by our guilt and remorse and shame, by our insanities, and the two things that block us most surely from God are resentments and selfishness, because when we're buried in self, we don't leave any room for God's Spirit to come in. As much as we may want it, as much as we've been praying, as much as we've tried, as good a lives as we've tried to lead, nevertheless, we are blocked from God's Spirit, and without His Spirit we don't make it. Because we have no defense against that first drink. We have no defense against the insanity. And so the selfishness will kill us because it blocks us from God. God makes that possible. That means we're going to have to be rid of it. God makes that possible. And there often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without His aid. Many of us had moral and philosophical convictions galore, but we could not live up to them, even though we would have liked to. Neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. We had to have God's help. And what this clearly means is that we are as powerless over self as we are over alcohol. And we're going to find when we get into the fourth step that we're as powerless over our resentments as we are over alcohol. We are as powerless over our fears as we are over alcohol. We are as powerless over our dishonesties as we are over alcohol. And therefore, in each of these cases, we must have God's help. But it is available because we have the spiritual solution to all of these problems. Now, having seen this, having clearly identified there are problems of our own making, that they arise out of ourselves, that we've made decisions based on self which have led us in a place to be hurt and to fail, that we cannot be free of self on our own, and we have to have God's help with it, we then come to the conclusion that our lives are a mess and unmanageable because we have tried to manage them. We're at a critical point here. We have reached a place where we have seen that our lives are unmanageable because we tried to run them ourselves based on self-will. And what are we going to do about it? Look at the next paragraph. The big book always does this. It poses the problem and thereafter always gives us the solution. This is the how and why of it. That means here is the solution. First of all, we had to quit playing God. It did not work. This has been the problem. This is why our lives have been unmanageable. We always thought it was because we were drunk. The unmanageability is a product of our spiritual bankruptcy, the product of our self-will. It's a product of our trying to play God, not a product of our alcoholism. Alcohol is but a symptom of the real problem. And until we understand that, we go off on these human solution wild goose chases trying to recover by applying human solutions to a spiritual problem. The real answer is we've got to quit playing God. It didn't work. So therefore, this is the third step decision now. Next, we decided that hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be our director. He is the principal. We are His agents. He is the Father, and we are His children. And we implement this decision by our third step prayer. And we go on from there immediately into our fourth step. So this is the way that the steps in the Big Book have shown us the spiritual solution to our unmanageable lives. We stop trying to manage them ourselves. And in our third step prayer, we say, God, I offer myself to Thee to build with me and to do with me as Thou wilt. And that turns out to be the answer. And it is our spiritual growth which provides the solid foundation for our future life, which is a life based upon what Bill Wilson described back in his story, that I must turn in all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. Now, every time we get sidetracked and we start answering 495 questions about why our lives are unmanageable, we've totally missed the point. And it's a shame, because there are lots of people who ought to be here today who are not. They've never been properly and carefully taught. And so when we look at this business of let's go back now to page 38, please. We'll get caught up here now. In the second part of the third chapter, we're going to be looking at material which is clearly first step material in one sense, but it is also extremely important material for the second step. And the reason for that is that the second step states a conclusion which we may not agree with. That we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And now that raises the question in many people's mind, what do you mean about insanity? Because in most cases there has been no such diagnosis, and we certainly have had some concern about our sanity along the line. But here it is in black and white, facing us directly as one of the 12 steps, that God can restore me to sanity. Then what is this insanity? And this latter part of the third chapter, it answers that question. Now, we already had the beginnings, didn't we? Because we studied the case of Jim, the car dealer. Remember Jim? Remember he was out there to sell a car at a Roadhouse cafe, had lunch as usual, had a glass of milk, had a sandwich, and decided it would be okay to put some whiskey in his milk, and because he'd had a full stomach and it couldn't hurt him. And this started another round of drinking, and ended up back in the hospital again for Jim. And this in spite of the fact that he had just gotten his family back. He had just gotten a job where he had lost his automobile agency. He was just beginning to rehabilitate his life. He knew that if he took a drink, he knew what was going to happen. He knew the dreadful consequences, and yet, when the time came and he was faced with the decision whether to drink or not to drink, he was powerless, because the obsession, compulsion to drink overwhelmed him. And he had made no struggle, no fight at all. And this is so important for us to understand, because we're always being bombarded with this idea that somehow if we struggle and fight against the next drink, that we'll be able to avoid it. And sometimes it may work that way, but so often it does not. And that is not the solution to sobriety. It isn't. If we could simply not drink because we can use our willpower not to drink, we wouldn't need to be in here. We wouldn't need to be sitting in here on a Sunday afternoon. We could be out there playing. But we're here because we can't not drink. We're here because we have no power. We're here because the insanity of that first drink will come right back and grab us if we have no protection. And that happened with Jim. Because he thought, as he's sitting there, the thought just crossed his mind, it'd be okay to have a little whiskey. As the big book told us, whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. How can such a lack of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else? Now, last week we also read and thought about the allegory of the jaywalker, and many of you had said, well, that sounds just like me. I can really identify with that. This guy who had a passion for jaywalking, and he got away with it for a long time. And then he started getting hurt. And progressively he got hurt worse. And he'd go to the hospital with broken this and broken that. And he'd swear off, and he would be worse. Then he lost his job, he lost his family. He took the solemn pledge, he checked himself into an insane asylum. When he came out the same day, he walked in front of a fire engine and broke his back and died. You say, well, this guy's got to be nuts. Why wouldn't he just stop jaywalking? And the people who are not alcoholics say the same thing to us. Why don't you just stop drinking? What's the matter with you? Just stop. Look what you're doing to your family. You just lost 6 jobs this year. How many more rehabs you going to go to? Just stop drinking. Look at me. I don't drink. And when I do, I have a couple. Maybe I leave half of the second one. And we say, yeah, that's what's wrong with you, you know. They don't know. They don't understand. That's why we get together, you see, because we do understand. Why? It's simple. We've all been there. Every one of us has experienced exactly what we're talking about. We know. We know what it means to be powerless. We know what it means to be on a path of destruction and not being able to get off. We know what it means to have lived in hell. Alcoholic died, went to heaven. St. Peter, he did tell, you'll have to let me in, Pete. I have already been to hell. And see, we know that. And so we can help each other when nobody else can. Now, there are lots of folks out there who have many degrees and stuff, and they really want to help us. They really do. But they've never been in our shoes. And they really believe in almost every case that all that's necessary is for us to get enough knowledge about ourselves. Self-knowledge will do it. Now, let's see about that. Down at bottom of page 38. And this is talking now about this allegory of the jaywalker. Some of you are thinking, yes, but what you tell us is true, but it doesn't fully apply. We admit we have some of these symptoms, but we've not gone to the extremes you fellows did, nor are we likely to. For we understand ourselves so well, after what you've told us, that such things cannot happen again. We've not lost everything in life through drinking, and we certainly do not intend to. Thanks for the information. That may be true of certain non-alcoholic people who, though drinking foolishly and heavily at the present time, are able to stop or moderate, because their brains and bodies have not been damaged as ours were. And there are lots of those folks in AA, you know. And that's wonderful. We're glad they're here. We're very happy to have them here. But we have to be very careful, because many of them don't need the book. And they don't need the spiritual program of action. All they need is the impetus of remembering their last drunk and the fear of the consequences of drinking again. And that'll keep them sober, because they're not alcoholics, you see. So we have to be careful, because if you're a real alcoholic, it ain't going to work for you. That's a siren song. That's the easier, softer way, and we'd all love to have it. But unfortunately, we don't get to have that. If we're real alcoholics, we got to dig in. We've got to get down to the bottom of this stuff. We have to be willing to face ourselves honestly and fully and completely. We have to be willing to take all of that to God. We have to be willing to live a spiritual way of life. But that's not a curse, it's a blessing. Stop and think about it. We get to have a life beyond anything we could ever have dreamed up for ourselves. And we get that because we work the steps. And we continue to live a spiritual way of life. And when we do that, it becomes an absolute marvel. And I feel sorry for those who are not so driven, to their knees and not so squashed, because they're not willing to do what we must do, and therefore they can never have what we get to have. See, we have a heritage which is out there for us, and we get to have this. God's promised it to us. We get to live happily, joyously, and freely. And of these, the greatest of all is freedom, the freedom from the bondage of self. We get to have joy and happiness. Look around you in AA rooms, and you'll see people who are experiencing this joy and this happiness. You'll see others who have just arrived, and they can't understand how we can get up here and tell the most outrageous things about ourselves, and everybody laughs. Because we've been there. We know it's ridiculous. We know it's crazy. We know we were goofy as the dickens when we got here. But we can laugh about it because we have been saved from that hell. And so we laugh. Partly in relief, partly in gratitude, partly just because we see the ironies involved. We see those things about ourselves which truly are humorous, even though at the time they were tragic. Going on, but the actual or potential alcoholic, with hardly exception, will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. Please, that's in italics, but make a check mark or underline or do something. This is a rule. Absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. Now let's see how that applies, because this is a critical statement, and it is critical to our understanding of recovery, and especially for our understanding of recovery as it is being presented to us by the human solutionists. Why? Because their solution is the imparting to us of that kind of knowledge which will teach us why we drank, why we ought not to drink, what alcohol will do to us if we drink, what it is about our emotions and our feelings that we've been stuffing. They want to teach us about the committee in our head. They want to teach us about all the things that Gestalt will teach us. They want to teach us about everything we can learn in group therapy and encounter groups. They want to teach us about the things about ourselves that we can learn by going on a couch. And we learn all those things, and we learn them well, and we are released with the idea that now we're cured. Because we have so much knowledge about ourselves, we'll never drink again. See, the idea is if I know why I drink, then I can fight that. I can use my willpower. And I have all these so-called, what do they call them, triggers. And then I have this bud building up to drink, and I can watch myself going through that big U-turn and all this stuff. And I've watched Father Martin, and he made me laugh, and I've watched all this other stuff. But it doesn't work. Because self-knowledge won't keep us sober. And if it would, we wouldn't need AA, we just need treatment centers. All we need to be the professionals who know how to teach us all about ourselves. And then we fall for some of the human solution stuff, like, for example, you're only as sick as your secrets. That can't possibly be true, because if you turn it around, if you have no secrets, you're not necessarily going to be well. that if you don't open your mouth, you'll open a bottle. And we're supposed to dump everything that's going on with us on all of our unsuspecting friends and fellow alcoholics. Let them carry the burden out the door, and we go out singing a song. But you see, this is not Problems Anonymous in here. This is not an encounter group. And I'm not a facilitator. We have a message which is brought to us in the Big Book, which is an inspired message, which tells us how we can go from a place of rebellion and defiance and denial to a place of surrender and obedience, and therefore our problem with alcohol will be solved. Period. Now we've got to understand that all the self-knowledge in the world won't keep us sober, and there's one more corollary to that. That all the fear in the world of the consequences of the next drunk will not keep us sober. The truth of the matter is that fear is our enemy, not our friend. Fear has destroyed us. Fear is the hitman that pride sends forth to kill us. And if we depend upon fear to stay sober, it's a fool's paradise, a blind alley, and we get drunk. Going on page 39 now, this is a point we wish to emphasize and re-emphasize to smash home upon our alcoholic readers as it has been revealed to us out of bitter experience. We will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. Let's take another illustration. Now we get to the story of Fred. All right, Fred is a partner in a well-known accounting firm. His income is good. He has a fine home, is happily married, and the father of promising children of college age. He has so attractive a personality that he makes friends with everyone. If ever there was a successful businessman, it's Fred. To all appearance, he's a stable, well-balanced individual. You're thinking to yourself what I am? This guy doesn't have an unmanageable life, does he? You'd never be able to point to Fred and say, look at the unmanageability of his life. No wonder he's an alcoholic. Next sentence. Yet he is alcoholic. We first saw Fred about a year ago in a hospital where he'd gone to recover from a bad case of jitters. It was his first experience of this kind, and he was much ashamed of it. Well, of course, Fred had major ego. He was a guy with a lot of pride in what he had accomplished. He's pride in his family and his standing in the community. Probably even had a damn good credit rating, which many of us can't say. And yet, here he was in the hospital, and he's much ashamed of it. Far from admitting he was an alcoholic, he told himself he came to the hospital to rest his nerves. I remember hearing that years and years ago. And when people had enough money, they would go away 2 or 3 times a year to rest their nerves. And what they were really doing was getting dried out. And they could keep going for a while after that, sometimes 4 times a year, sometimes twice a year. So he was resting his nerves. The doctor intimated strongly that he might be worse than he realized. For a few days he was depressed about his condition. He made up his mind to quit drinking altogether. It never occurred to him that perhaps he could not do so, in spite of his character and standing. Fred would not believe himself an alcoholic, much less accept a spiritual remedy for his problem. Remember what the Big Book tells us later on in chapter 7, that if he is to find God, that the desire must come from within. And many times all we're doing with someone like Fred is planting seeds which may or may not germinate later. We told him what we knew about alcoholism. He was interested and conceded that he had some of the symptoms, but he was a long way from admitting that he could do nothing about it himself. He was positive that this humiliating experience, Plus, the knowledge he had acquired would keep him sober the rest of his life. Self-knowledge would fix it. We heard no more of Fred for a while. One day we were told he was back in the hospital. This time he was quite shaky. He soon indicated he was anxious to see us. The story he told is most instructive, for here was a chap absolutely convinced that he had to stop drinking, who had no excuse for drinking, who exhibited splendid judgment and determination in all his other concerns, yet was flat on his back, nevertheless. Let him tell you about it. I was much impressed with what you fellows said about alcoholism, and I frankly did not believe it would be possible for me to drink again. I rather appreciated your ideas about the subtle insanity which precedes the first drink, but I was confident it could not happen to me after what I had learned. I reasoned I was not so far advanced as most of you fellows, that I'd been usually successful in licking my other personal problems, and that I would therefore be successful where you men failed. I felt I had a right to be self-confident, that it would be only a matter of exercising my willpower and keeping on guard. Precisely the advice we keep hearing around these rooms. Don't drink. Remember your last drunk. Keep it green. Stay on guard and go to meetings. It was only a matter of exercising my willpower and keeping on guard. In this frame of mind I went about my business for a time, and all was well. I had no trouble refusing drinks, and I began to wonder if I had not been making too hard work of a simple matter. One day I went to Washington to present some accounting evidence to a government bureau. I'd been out of town before during this particular dry spell, so there was nothing new about that. Physically, I felt fine. Neither did I have any pressing problems or worries. My business came off well. I was pleased, and knew my partners would be too. It was the end of a perfect day, not a cloud on the horizon. See any triggers in there? See any bud in there? No. I went to my hotel and leisurely dressed for dinner. As I crossed the threshold of the dining room, the thought came to mind that it would be nice to have a couple of cocktails with dinner. That was all, nothing more. So I ordered a cocktail and my meal. Then I ordered another cocktail. After dinner I decided to take a walk. When I returned to the hotel, it struck me as a highball would be fine before going to bed. So I stepped into the bar and had one. I remember having several more that night, and plenty next morning. I have a shadowy recollection of being in an airplane bound for New York, and of finding a friendly taxicab driver at the landing field instead of my wife. The driver escorted me about for several days. I know little of where I went or what I said and did. Then came the hospital with unbearable mental and physical suffering. As soon as I regained my ability to think, I went carefully over that evening in Washington. Not only had I been off guard, I had made no fight whatever against the first drink. This time I had not thought of the consequences at all. Let's see where else we find this. Go back to page 24, please. 24. First paragraph. The fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drink. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink. We have another very important thought on the next page. Let's review that while we're here, page 25. The last partial paragraph. If you are as seriously alcoholic as we were, we believe there is no middle-of-the-road solution. We were in a position where life was becoming impossible, and if we'd passed into the region from which there is no return through human aid, we had but two alternatives. One was to go on to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of our intolerable situation as best we could, and the other to accept spiritual help. Now you see what this is saying. We don't have a third alternative, which is to don't drink and go to meetings. Use your willpower. Find out all about why you drank. Learn to have verbal diarrhea and spew all over everybody. Remember that you are entitled to your feelings and all that stuff. So we don't have that alternative. We would like to think we do. We'd love it if we did. Would save so much of this falderall. We wouldn't have to be going through all this spiritual stuff. We wouldn't have to go out and make amends. We wouldn't have to look honestly at ourselves and then suffer the humiliation of sitting down with another human being and tell them stuff that we would never have told anybody the rest of our lives, that we've been running from and doing geographic so nobody'd find out about, and we have to do that. And then we have to learn to live a spiritual way of life for the rest of our lives. Gee, if we could just have this human solution, wouldn't that be nice? But if you're as seriously alcoholic as we are, and you're new, and you may be if you're here, then you have two choices. You can either go on the way you have, try to blot all this stuff out as best you can, knowing that you have a disease which is deadly and incurable, or you can accept spiritual help. Those are the alternatives which we have. Okay. Let's go back now to page 41, please. Let's review again in the italics. Not only had I been off guard, I had made no fight whatever against the first drink. This time I had not thought of the consequences at all. I had commenced to drink as carelessly as though the cocktails were ginger ale. I now remembered what my alcoholic friends had told me, how they prophesied that if I had an alcoholic mind, the time and place would come, I would drink again. That term, alcoholic mind, is interesting, isn't it? And we find it in several places in the big book. It's important for us to understand that the alcoholic mind is that mind which is devoid of the necessary willpower, the necessary strength to refuse to drink. It is a mind which is insane. It is a mind which lies to its owner. It's a mind that says it'll be okay this time. This time we'll just have a couple of drinks and we'll have some fun. It says you're entitled. You've had a rough day. You've had a rough week. Look what they did to you. Look at that nasty person you're married to. No wonder you drink. Look at those lousy kids. They're driving me nuts. I'm entitled to a drink. Or I'm facing an operation. I'm entitled to drink. I'm facing bankruptcy. I'm entitled to drink. Just have a couple and take the edge off. Or I can't sleep. I'll just have a quick one to get to sleep. The mind lies to us over and over again, and sometimes it doesn't even bother to lie. It just puts the idea out there. The obsession takes over, the compulsion takes over, and we drink without even having thought it through at all. And so we're talking here about having an alcoholic mind. And Dr. Silkworth described that, didn't he? Because remember, when we deal with alcoholism, we're dealing with twofold problem here. One, of course, is the physical aspect of the disease. And as long as we don't take that first drink, we never kick off that phenomenon of craving. So the real problem is not to take the first drink, but it is our minds which have led us constantly back to taking that first drink, our insane minds, even though we knew the consequences would be horrific. So since we can do nothing about the physical aspects of the disease, everything in the big book and the 12 steps has to do with not taking that first drink, and to supplement or to substitute God's power for our lack of power, so that eventually, as we go through the steps, we will find that our insanity has been removed, that we're no longer goofy, we're no longer screwy, we no longer have these strange twists of mind. We don't have an alcoholic mind anymore. God has taken that away from us. And we've done our part by working the steps. And at that point, we are then set free, because the problem of alcohol has been removed. It doesn't exist for us. So long as we are not dealing with the obsession, compulsion to drink, we're not going to get drunk. And the physical aspect of the disease is mooted. It's saying over here, it never goes away, but it can't hurt us. So when we think alcoholic mind, you can add your own definitions to it, but it is that state of mind which makes it impossible for us on our own willpower and our own volition to avoid that first drink. That if I had an alcoholic mind, the time and place would come, I would drink again. Going on page 42 now. They had said that though I did raise the defense, it would one day give way before some trivial reason for having a drink. Well, just that did happen and more, for what I had learned of alcoholism didn't occur to me at all. I knew from that moment I had an alcoholic mind. I saw that willpower and self-knowledge would not help in those strange mental blank spots. If you're underlining or doing whatever, strange mental blank spots. That phrase is so important to keep in mind, because it's descriptive of what you and I suffer from. And it's descriptive of what untreated alcoholism will constantly lead us back to. I'd never been able to understand people who said that a problem had them hopelessly defeated. I knew then it was a crushing blow. Now this is reminiscent of what we read in Bill's story, isn't it? The same thing happened to him. Let's take a look back on page 8. The first full paragraph on page 8. No words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. And now we find back here on page 42 that the same thing happened with Fred, you see? And we can watch him taking his first step here right in front of us, can't we? It was a crushing blow, he says. 2 members of Alcoholics Anonymous came to see me. They grinned, which I didn't like so much. And then asked me if I thought myself alcoholic, and if I were really licked this time. I had to concede both propositions. They piled on me heaps of evidence to the effect that an alcoholic mentality such as I had exhibited in Washington was a hopeless condition. They cited cases out of their own experience by the dozen. This process snuffed out the last flicker of conviction that I could do the job myself. Remember what we learned back there on page 30? The obsession, the delusion that we are like other people, or presently may be, has to be smashed. Remember, we talked about this the last couple of weeks. If we have not reached that point where we have given up entirely the idea that we can never drink again, as long as we live, we cannot work the first step until that happens. And here we see it happening with Fred. This process snuffed out the last flicker of conviction that I could do the job myself. Then they outlined the spiritual answer and program of action, which 100 of them had followed successfully. Notice that they followed along with basically the outline we're going to find in chapter 7, that once we have found that our new person is convinced of that they are alcoholics, and that they have to put aside alcohol for good and all, then we tell them how we recovered. So that's what they did here. Then they outlined the spiritual answer. Notice, not a human solution, a spiritual answer and program of action, which means a spiritual program of action, which 100 of them had followed successfully. Though had been only a nominal churchman, their proposals were not intellectually hard to swallow. But the program of action, though entirely sensible, was pretty drastic. And of course we know that's what stops so many of our brothers and sisters from making it in here. They're just not willing to do it. It meant I would have to throw several lifelong conceptions out of the window. That was not easy. I know everything I knew when I got here was wrong. I'd start all over again, and I suspect that many of you have had to do that. But the moment I made up my mind to go through with the process, I had the curious feeling that my alcoholic condition was relieved, as in fact it proved to be. Now we're going to find this all the way through our lives. At the moment, and I was talking to somebody about this morning, the moment we make a commitment, we make a decision, we know we're committed to go through with it, which will help us grow spiritually, which will help us to go to those lengths we need to go in order to defeat alcoholism with God's help. The moment we make that decision, that commitment, we start to feel better. And this goes across the board in everything we do in life. It is that indecision, or the sitting back trying to find loopholes or find a way not to do it, or find excuses, or rationalizing, or telling ourselves, for example, well, I've always been a procrastinator, why would it change now? And I'm the kind of person that doesn't get anything done properly till I'm under pressure. And then I work better under pressure. And we tell ourselves that. We say, well, let's just go to the beach then today, or watch the football game. We don't have to do this work that we promised the boss we would do before we came in tomorrow. Of course, I can do it. I'll find it. I'll do it. I'll find time. Or maybe I'll just make an excuse. I was sick today. On and on. And about that time we say, well, it's time for a beer. All right. Let's have a beer. It's Budweiser time. I'm a Budaholic. Okay. The program of action seemed insensible, drastic. It meant I would have to throw out several lifetime conceptions out the window. This was not easy, but the moment I made my mind to go through with the process, I had the curious feeling my alcoholic problem was relieved, as in fact it proved to be. Quite as important was the discovery that spiritual principles would solve all my problems. Wow. That just came flying off the page there, didn't it? I mean, that's really profound. That's bottom line stuff. Spiritual principles solve all my problems. And it turns out that that's true. I have since been brought into a way of living infinitely more satisfying, and I hope more useful than the life I lived before. My old manner of life was by no means a bad one, but I would not exchange its best moments for the worst I have now. I would not go back to it even if I could. That's an interesting little twist on what we usually hear around here. I would not exchange my old life's best moments for the worst moments I have now in sobriety. Fred's story speaks for itself. We hope it strikes home to thousands like him. He had felt only the first nip of the ringer. Anybody know what a ringer is? No. You do? You don't know? Okay.
Wash your machine and take the water out.
Yeah, that's right. We didn't. Yeah, you didn't have a spin dry. You pulled them out and you ran them through two rubber things that squeezed the water out of them.
I put my arm through one.
You can imagine getting caught in that. Many different parts of our bodies. The first nip of the ringer. Just got the tip of the finger. Most alcoholics have to be pretty badly mangled before they really commence to solve their problems. Many doctors and psychiatrists agree with our conclusions. One of these men, a staff member of a world-renowned hospital, recently made this statement to some of us. What do you say about the general hopelessness of the average alcoholic's plight is, in my opinion, correct. As to two of you men whose stories I've heard, there's no doubt in my mind that you are 100% hopeless apart from divine help. Had you offered yourself as patients at this hospital, I would have not have taken you if I could have been able to avoid it. People like you are too heartbreaking. Though not a religious person, I have profound respect for the spiritual approach in such cases as yours. Listen to this now. For most cases, there is virtually no other solution. And this is coming, by the way, from Dr. Silkworth, who had 20-some years of experience with us prior to this, and he had been watching these guys go into his hospital and work with his hopeless cases and see them walk out and come back a month later to help the next person. He knew it was working, and he saw them praying together too, and he couldn't deny what he was seeing. It was right there in front of him. Now, here's the rule. Once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. Except in a few rare cases, neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defense. His defense must come from a higher power. And that, my friends, is why we're all here. That's why we're here. Because we, in each of us, must find a higher power of our own understanding, our own choosing, and we must surrender to that higher power, to that God, if we expect to recover from this seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. And when we do that, inevitably we do recover. Remember that the promises all the way through the big book are nothing more nor less than the inevitable result of working the steps. If we do the work, we get the promises. And count on it. All right, so now next week we're going to be commencing our study of the 4th chapter. We're going to be continuing our look at the 2nd step as we go through the 4th chapter. And it's going to be a lot of fun because this chapter is really powerful, very profound. And we get a chance to examine some rather extraordinary statements and postulates which this chapter advances for us to come to try to understand. And we may find that a lot of our ideas are changed drastically by what we study and read in this chapter. Take a 10-minute break, please. Come back and we will do our birthday stuff. Did anybody leave glasses up here by any chance? Ooh, that's scary. I don't think I want to be on the road when that person's driving. How are you doing today? Good to see you. What's your name again?
James.
What is it?
James.
James?
Yep.
Good, James. Glad to see you. Hello, Ellie.
Hi, Jim.
There he is.
Yesterday I tried to find you at 101. I couldn't find a place.
Oh, okay. Atlantic Boulevard, east to Dixie, south to 10th. It's right there.
It's a dark alley kind of thing?
No. There's a wholesale fish place on one corner and 101 Club's on the other corner. And it says
That's the best way to find it, behind the fish market.
Behind the fish
I had problems the first
market.
time.
The fish market is
it's on Dixie.
on Dixon?
Dixie at 10.
Dixon and 10. And behind the fish market,
There's another building, it's its own building.
so nothing dark. I ended up in some dark alley with some weird houses and things like that.
When you're driving,
It's a business building like this.
down Dixie, you're coming from this way,
Yeah, I'm coming north. Yeah,
so you're heading south.
Yeah.
On your right hand side, you'll see a fish market.
right hand side.
Yeah.
Right hand side. Fish market. I don't
Fish
remember.
market. Behind the fish market.
It's the place.
Come on, guys. Let's go. Sarah, did you want to come up and do the honors?
Hi, I'm an alcoholic and your secretary, and my name is Sarah.
Hi, Sarah.
We're the Freedom Group. We meet here every Sunday for an hour and a half. And thanks for helping with the rent because we do have to pay more because we're here longer. We're celebrating October birthdays today. And first of all, I'd like to ask if Jean is here. We're celebrating 1 year.
No, Jean's not here.
No, Jean's here. And Jay, 3 years. I didn't see him either. Okay. So now we'll move on to Mark.
I'm here.
Mark is celebrating 6 years.
Hi everybody, I'm Mark. I'm an alcoholic. 6 years. I don't know what to tell you guys other than the fifth year they talk about emotional sobriety and you kind of get your brain back and it's true. It's been kind of a roller coaster ride for probably the last when I got my fifth and my sixth, and I still I'm on it, but I'm getting used to it now. I'm not freaking out as much as I used to, although I am kind of freaking out a little bit. I want to be hopeful but honest. All the emotions that you thought, when your head gets clean and you kind of get the pink cloud and all that, I'm actually working through adult things, and I feel like I'm trying to grow up, and this program really helps me do it. But I don't know. I've never been so scared in my life. Basically, you guys. I'm sorry. I really don't want to rain on anybody's parade here, but my company's going through some problems. But the thing I do want to relay is that I really don't feel like I want to pick up a drink. And I think that's a miracle in of itself. And I know that this is this always helps, just come into meetings and to try to work the steps and to try to get a little bit more spiritual. And I was talking to Jim about what, and Stacy and, a lot of you people in here that I talk to. And I still, there are days when I feel really disconnected even with the program, but I know that I just keep coming back and I keep asking for God's help. And if I do that, I think I'll be okay. And when I don't do that, then I'm like I'm a nutbag, But I would say overall, I'm kind of a level nutbag. The sanity is kind of at a manageable level now, and I believe it's because of the steps and trying to give back. And I have a sponsee, and I think I still have a sponsee, and all the problems with that, and I probably don't want to get. I don't want to get into his problems with you guys right now, but I know that he's helping. He was helping me more than I was helping him, and it's it's just the fellowship, and just trying to do the next right thing. And I know that sounds so corny, do the next right thing. I just want to do the right thing, whatever it is, and I still take my will back and I fight with that. But I never thought I'd have 6 years either. Looking around, and I was thinking about that today because I knew I was going to pick up a shift, and it seems like an eternity. When I was back fighting, with the 90 days and all that, and yet it doesn't. It seems like it's just going like this. So it's crazy, and I'm just glad to be here. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mark, happy birthday. I hate to burst your bubble though.
Yeah, I know.
The 7th year is the hardest.
Yeah, I wasn't that upbeat either. Thanks, Jim.
All right, I've got one sitting right here, and let's see. It's either x minus 3 or it's x plus 3. I guess since there's no x minus 3 in the Roman numerals, this must be 13. I have to say the 14th year is definitely the hardest. And this guy has been following me around. At first I thought somebody had hired him to get the goods on me. Then he showed up with this, and then I knew he was taping me for some nefarious purpose. The work that he's done, however, in the last 2 years has spread all over the United States and in many parts of the world now. And since we do this together 4 times a week, and he's always there, and I'm always there, we both are able to make a commitment and live up to it. I do 3 other meetings every week, but he doesn't show up for those. He would if I let him, but I can't, 4 a week is plenty. Tom has been wonderful, and he's been consistent. He's been a friend. He's done his work. He does it well. He's a perfectionist, and he's done a tremendous amount of good for people, because I'm a mouthpiece, but he's the one that takes all this stuff that comes flowing out of my mouth by the grace of God, and he puts it on tape and on CDs, and it gets to go out to people who might not otherwise be able to hear it. So we feel that between the 2 of us, we're really spreading the word, and after all, that's what God expects of us, isn't it? And so I'd like to present a 13-year medallion to my friend Tom.
My name's Tom. I'm an alcoholic. Hey, Tom. And it's been great. I said this last night. Last 2 years, I wouldn't be able to stay sober if I'd been drinking. No, I wouldn't be able to stay sober. Anyway, there's a lot of stuff that happened that, if I was drinking, I would not have been able to handle it. I would have committed suicide or whatever. I don't know what I would have done if I was been drinking, but God's gotten me through it, and I said this last night at the 101. I did send in copies of everything he's done and to have it analyzed, and he's not lying. Everything's true, he says.
Voice stress analyzation, yeah. It's good. I'm glad you did that.
I'm grateful for Alcoholics Anonymous, all you people who are part of Alcoholics Anonymous. And everybody, please keep coming back, because if it wasn't for you guys, I wouldn't be here. Thanks.
Tom's got a brand new theory, he wouldn't have been able to stay sober if he'd been drinking, so. Gosh, I never thought about that. Very good, Tom. All righty, let's go to page 39, and let's take a look at our friend Fred. Oh, by the way, before we start into Fred, Mark had asked me a question at the break about this business of self-knowledge not being sufficient to enable us to stop drinking. And it was a quite legitimate question, and I'm glad he raised it, and I'll pass along the answer to you. Of course, self-knowledge is of critical importance to us, isn't it? Because we do our 4th step. And in our 4th step, we're going to find out exactly what's going on with us and where we stand and what our present reality is. But then it's a question of what do we do with it. What this means is that self-knowledge alone will not keep us sober. And there could be some significant fallout, good fallout from all the self-knowledge stuff that was drummed into us by the human solutionists. But it's always going to be a question of what we do with it. Remember that we must, after we have learned about ourselves, we must then be willing to articulate what we've learned, to put it into words, not only to admit it to God and to ourselves, but to another human being. And that fifth step is so critical. It's a spiritual principle that we deal with there, that we must be willing to admit to another human being what we found. And then, of course, we take what we have found and we take it to God and we ask Him for help. And we've also found out whom we have harmed, and in our ninth step we go out and make amends. So you see, it is taking that self-knowledge and then using it, and therefore invoking God's power in our lives, and that's what's missing with the human solution.